Welcome back to Hashtag Lawyer. Today we're going to talk about the glamorous world of entertainment law. We have Megan Turner in studio to talk to us about the areas of law that are encompassed with entertainment law and what entertainers and other people involved in this industry need to know. Welcome back to Hashtag Lawyer, everybody. Back in the studio, we've got an in-studio guest, Megan Turner, here today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited to be on the show today.
Absolutely, absolutely. And of course, the two of you have a history together.
We do. We went to law school together.
Yep.
Yeah, we definitely helped each other get through practice court.
Oh yeah, I remember us studying at the coffee shop with our little note cards and
Oh my
highlighters.
gosh.
Good times.
There was like 5 million colors. We had a system down.
Oh, don't get me started with that. Austin doesn't want to.
Lawyers, you guys are so proud of your practice court.
We are, thank you, actually.
That's a debate for the reels or another episode. At some point,
yeah. Well, it's a very character building program.
That's what I've heard.
That's a nice way to put it.
That's what I've heard. So Megan, obviously you went to Baylor Law School and you have a practice. It's based, you do work here in DFW, but then you also do work elsewhere as well, right?
I do. So I grew up in the DFW area. And then have a home in Austin as well. So I often commute back and forth, but I always love coming back home to Dallas.
Yeah. What part of Dallas did you grow up in?
Well, I'm from, if you know where Highland Park High School is, that's where I went to high school. And, I've got family also in Colleyville.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you ended up, you were in Nashville at one point. Okay. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I went to undergrad at Belmont University, which is in Nashville, Tennessee. And I was a songwriting major with a music business minor, which is, you don't hear that every day, I suppose.
Definitely not
the
with
legal
lawyers.
Right.
Yeah, so before I applied to Belmont, of course, I was really interested in music. I played guitar starting at a young age, was always taking voice lessons, and I was in little bands in high school. We'd play little gigs around town, and I remember I actually would play on the rooftop at Seventh Haven, which was a bar at the time in Fort Worth area. Where I was trying to save up college money. I had my tip jar that was, Belmont or bust on the front of the label.
Nice.
Yeah.
So cute.
So that was really fun. Of course, got into the songwriting program, and studying at Belmont was really where I had discovered a passion for the law, where I took a copyright law class. But not only that, I also got to intern with a publishing company. Okay. So they had given me the opportunity to become familiar with synchronization licenses and helping artists get plugged for music and television spots to get their song, let's say, on a reality TV show or something like that, where they needed some background music, which was really good for mid-level artists to get some exposure, but then also make sure that things were cleared so they were getting paid royalties as well. Also worked for a PR company that would put on showcases for local artists playing around the Nashville area, which was really fun. But where I decided I wanted to pursue entertainment law was, being a songwriter and being in a situation where Nashville is such a fun town and there's so many great things about it. One of them being that there are musicians and everybody gets to know each other really well. Of course, when you become comfortable in that situation, in that setting, a lot of handshake deals happen.
Yeah.
Where
the handshake deal.
I hear those all the time, especially in construction.
Right.
Yeah, and it's kind of a buzzkill, of course, for two musicians to get together and say, hey, let's write, let's get together, let's put together a really good piece. I've got some ideas for lyrics, for song, whatever. A couple of friends get together in an apartment and they decide that they're going to start writing the next big hit, right? Well, one of them could go off, and I've seen it happen. It's not only happened to me, it's happened to other friends of mine, being early on in that stage of your career, where you'll discover later on that somebody recorded that and didn't give you any credit for it.
Yeah.
Where you thought, wait, I thought we were friends. What happened?
You want to dig the knife out of my back now?
Exactly, something like that. So it does happen on a regular basis, but that's what really gave me the idea to pursue entertainment law, was from that perspective.
Now I got to ask, what kind of genre were you performing at Seventh Haven?
More singer-songwriter.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I really loved particularly, a little bit of country. Going to Nashville, of course, you have country, but a little bit of rock.
Yeah. Didn't want to assume, though. I wanted to ask.
It's a fair assumption.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. That's awesome. The handshake deal thing, that's what you and I talked about on our pre-show call about how frequently that happened. Did that ever happen to you?
Yes.
Okay. Wow.
I won't talk too much about it.
Sure.
It all worked out in the end, but I will say I was surprised when I was, at least I had some notice about the deal where I was presented with a situation where I had worked with an artist who was, signed to a publisher, and that wasn't, told to me at the beginning, like how the deal would work, what kind of percentages they were thinking about as far as that went. So it was more after the fact that they came at me with, hey, by the way, I'm recording this on my next deal, but like, here's how it's going to be. It wasn't necessarily, like, I didn't think it was going to go anywhere. At the time, I was like 18 or 19.
Oh, so young.
Oh, yeah.
You're like a kid.
I know. You're like bright-eyed and hopeful about the world, right? But it happens. But, for a reason. So I'm glad to have learned from that experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
And hope to, of course, that's one thing I love doing is helping other people avoid those situations, when possible. But then if you do find yourself in that situation, I'm happy to help you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So Megan, speaking of that in your own personal experiences, the world of entertainment law, right, seems really broad because I'm thinking of, I don't know, issues that you run into recording The Real Housewives or copyright issues with song lyrics or Taylor Swift getting sued for the title of her album Evermore by that theme park in Utah that like I have never heard of. So, it's a wide variety of things. So how would you describe entertainment law to our listeners?
Entertainment law, I think a lot of people first focus by thinking music is one of the first things that comes to your head, film, television, but it really does encompass so many other things. Practicing entertainment law, you will find that you run into other areas of practice such as defamation, criminal actions, things like that where you wouldn't necessarily expect them to come up, but it does happen. So it is helpful to have a background where you're able to address those issues. But one of the most common things I think that comes up in entertainment law is copyright, because you're dealing with a creative work and whether or not you have the right to use or license that type of work, whether it be you're creating a derivative work of somebody else's work or if you're performing another work. One very common example is a YouTube artist or somebody who wants to do a cover at a show. They might have their favorite song they want to play, but you need to think about how can you do this in the right way and not get in trouble for it.
Right.
So I have a question for you. So, we were talking a little bit before the show about how there's a lot of, I don't want to say allegations, but how there's a lot of lore, if you will, about how various superstars got their start on YouTube, right? So if you have, say, Jama, she wants to be the next rock star, and she's like, I'm going to go ahead, write an original song and put it on YouTube, and then boom, I'm going to be discovered. It's going to be amazing. What advice would you have for Jama before she clicks post or whatever you click before you upload something to YouTube from a legal perspective with an emphasis on how to protect herself and her work?
Very good question. So a couple of things that come to mind when you give that example. If she's written both the lyrics and the music to the song, make sure that you get the copyright registration and your name for both those things. If there's somebody that she's worked with, make sure that you've got a good understanding of who owns what part of the song, but also understanding that you've now created a work where your collaboration is inseparable into one new creation. So definitely get that registered, even though, people will say, well, can't you do poor man's copyright and send it in the mail to yourself? Okay, so that's some good evidence that you've been the original creator, but definitely recommend registration to hold that protection for your work so that if you were to find somebody was infringing on your work and performing it in a way without your permission, that you do have some recourse. So that was one of the first things that comes to mind. Also with the video too, that's another thing that you've put together now, a work of you having a performance. I say you. What was the name that you gave? Jama. Okay. So that's a hypothetical, I'm assuming, of course.
It is. Okay. So, I actually have a Jama in my family, but it's just the first name that popped in my mind. Sorry, Jama. This is a mythical Jama.
Oh, okay. Lovely name. Right. Well, the video is something to also think about as well, So a lot of things that come up into play, and I will say it's great that you brought up somebody with a new song that they've written on their own, but a lot of times, we were talking about earlier, people will just decide to play a cover, of a YouTube post and just think, this is my new favorite song or the next, radio hit that I really like and I think I sing it well and let me put it on YouTube, but that's where people get in trouble because they haven't licensed the right to perform that work.
Yeah. Well, and diving deeper into the Jama example, would your advice be that prior to, because then we talked about, okay, if she's going to do that before she gets published, what would your advice be as far as when does she need to get someone like you involved? Is it when she starts working, before she starts working with somebody else to write the song? Is it while that's going on? What's your take on that?
I would say at the beginning, even if, people think, oh my gosh, attorneys are so expensive. But really, if you're in the early stages of your career, you can easily find somebody who offers brief consultations, just make that connection and say, hey, you know what, I'm a songwriter, singer, whoever, maybe even a musician who often works with other people as a songwriter, and say, here's what I'm looking at doing. If you have any, engagements that are coming up, say, what are some things that I need to look out for? And Andrea, you gave a great example of, hey, I'm thinking about posting something on YouTube, but before I do it, I have some questions. Definitely get involved at the beginning, because that's where you can really save yourself from getting into some difficult situations.
Yeah, well, and I didn't think about parsing out the lyrics, the music, and the video. I mean, that's something I wouldn't have even thought of, sitting here, because it makes sense. They're three different pieces of work, right? So
that's why you need someone experienced like Megan.
Well, at that point, when you have the music and lyrics together, then you've had, one work into a song. And that brings up another point. What happens when two people get together and they say, hey, Austin and I are going to write a song, let's say. And then I take it, a few weeks later and I have Andrea look at it and she adds some things to it. Okay, well now that's, arguably a derivative work, right? Because Austin and I already created one song, but I'm shopping it around to other singers and songwriters and seeing what their take on it. Well, Austin may not like that,
And so why don't you explain what derivative work is? Because I think probably a lot of people don't understand that terminology.
Sure. So a derivative work would be, for example, if I'm trying to think of something other than music, but for example, let's take a book, right? If I were to pick up a book and let's say it's got some very detailed characters in it, like, they've got certain names. Let's use Jama as a perfect example, right? Okay, it's all about Jama, and Jama has, let's say she has a certain occupation, and here's
horse trainer.
A horse trainer. Okay, great. We're going to have it right here. We're going to. Jama's a horse trainer. I like where this is going.
Yeah.
And she lives in a mythical place. Shiny Shoe Land or something.
There we go.
All about that. And let's say Andrea decides that she wants to continue the story of Jama living in Shiny Shoe Land as a horse trainer. But she decides to add her own take and just continue it on. Well, the original author is going to have a problem with that, because you've taken a copyrighted work and an idea that belongs to somebody else and you've added to it, and you're trying to put it out there and perhaps profit off of it, but the idea originated from somebody else's work, so that's what we call a derivative work.
So that's a really interesting, the way that you described it. So I have a question for you. Fan fiction.
Okay.
Yes.
Ooh,
so, right?
Yeah.
So I know when we were growing up, you're old, so I don't know, Austin. I'm kidding.
Taking shots all day today.
Pot shots. Yeah, pot shots all day, every day against you, Austin. So Twilight was a huge thing when we were growing up, Megan. And so I know a bunch of my friends were obsessed, right? And later, there was a lot of fan fiction for Twilight, right? Because everyone loved, was it Bella and Edward?
I think so.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, so the vampire and the girl. So I heard a rumor, I never fact checked it, that 50 Shades of Grey started off originally, that franchise, if you will, started off as fan fiction about like Bella and Edward because, it was very PG, and then this fan fiction was like rated X. And then it was eventually, so I'm told, the fan fiction was taken down, cleaned up, put into a book, and that's now what we know as the 50 Shades of Grey series. In this situation, what, as an entertainment lawyer, are your concerns?
So that sounds better, because at that point, it seems like you've used the other work as inspiration for your own creative work, rather than taking it, using the characters, using the creative elements of somebody else's work, and creating a derivative work. You've now made a new work because you've shown your own original creativity. And you're going to have characters and foils that repeat themselves throughout Hollywood, as you know. So you've got to be able to show that they are specific to your creative input.
So fan fiction, a little bit more of a problematic if they try to create their own work, but if you've just been inspired by it, maybe you're going to be okay.
Yes, but you would need to show definitely that you've got your own creative input.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So at your firm, obviously, a big part of what you do is we keep calling entertainment law. What are your typical types of clients that you represent?
So a lot of music, from that background I was telling you about. But, you'd be surprised. Sometimes people will call from different industries that say, hey, I'd like to incorporate a reading, into a performance, whether it be a religious service. Sometimes that comes up too,
Really? That's a copyright issue?
It depends. So of course the great lawyer answer, it depends, right?
Yeah.
Right. Because that is a performance. So whether or not you've got a fair use situation really depends on the facts. So, are you performing it in front of the public? Are you performing it in front of a private service? All kinds of things that could come up in those issues. But you would, really be surprised. I had talked with Austin a little bit that there was a client that I had worked on a case where somebody ended up on that cop show, where there's an arrest and that sort of thing. And then you're figuring out, how do I take this down? And that's, you're overlapping with criminal law, entertainment law. And, it of course depends on how that case came out to you, whether or not you can really do anything about it. But,
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned fair use a second ago. Can you kind of explain to our listeners what that means?
Yeah. So fair use, and there are several different areas that you could fall under different categories, but fair use is a situation where you wouldn't necessarily need to have a license to use a bit of somebody else's work. So again, it's one of those things where you would definitely need to look at the situation and the factors to see if you would be able to apply for that fair use exception.
Okay.
And so what's an example of fair use that you frequently run across?
Documentaries would be one. So not to say that just because it's in a documentary, it's automatically fair use, but, and then education would be another one. So again, you've just got to look at the situation, how the work is being used. Is it for furthering the use of education? Is it for informational purposes? Or is it for, just because you want to hype up your documentary or you want to hype up your film or whatever? You've got to show, why is that being used and what portion of it are you using and for what purpose?
Interesting. So I have a question for you. So say you have Sarah, and Sarah is 14 and she's a child prodigy on the guitar, and Sarah wants to write music. What should Sarah's mom consider before Sarah performs anywhere or puts anything out on YouTube or starts her own music channel on SoundCloud?
Very interesting with the mom, especially if she's much younger. And let's say, for example, she's considering signing with a manager. Mom is likely going to need to be involved to sign on her daughter's behalf because she's a minor, right? To protect Sarah.
Yes.
One of those things I would have her document everything. It's just general advice. If she wants to start writing songs, if she wants to get involved with somebody else like a vocal coach or something like that, just assemble her team, help assemble her team, whether it's an agent or somebody. But you just got to be careful and make sure that you get an attorney involved at the beginning to make sure that her interests are being protected.
Another thing I know that we talked about a little bit is something else you do is you'll negotiate show contracts for an event for some of your clients and all those types of things. One of the things I'm always curious about, because I hear about these things on TV, and I've actually seen it in a few contracts. What is the most unique thing you've had an artist or a client of yours negotiate for that they want, like Backstage?
Oh, are these like writers?
Yes.
Is that the proper term?
Yeah, so I've not had any brown M&M cases.
Okay.
Okay. So
actually, let's tell that anecdote of that story. Yeah.
Famously talked about in the industry is Van Halen's rumored writer contract for a tour. So they would say, supposedly, and I've not seen it myself, but here's what they say happened, is that they would say absolutely no brown M&Ms or something to that effect.
Okay.
It sounds ridiculous, right?
Yeah, it does sound ridiculous.
To make somebody pick out each and every brown M&M from your bowl, but...
How gross.
In a weird... I don't know if they...
I hope he's wearing latex gloves.
I'm sure back then they were real worried about that.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's kind of brilliant when you think about it, right? Because the writer can be so technical as far as what accommodations does your artist need when they get there to do their show and do their job right. Well, when you walk into the room and you look at the bowl and you see any brown M&Ms, something else is probably wrong too. There's probably something else missing. So that's an easy test to show, not that I would recommend anybody go to the lengths of requiring that, but it's just a goofy example.
Yeah, because the idea, I guess, behind that was, all right, if they miss the brown M&Ms, then we need to check the lighting, we need to check this, we need to check all those things. So exactly. It makes sense, but it's definitely humorous on the surface.
Yes, for sure.
So you have no brown M&Ms, but do you have anything like that?
I will say on the other side, I've seen this. So, working on the other artist side, I've not seen, any of my clients have any ridiculous demands, but I was a little bit surprised by a venue promoter requesting that an artist show up in full medieval costume for a themed event. I'm not kidding.
Nice.
Yeah. So this is real. Just can you imagine, as an artist, you're so excited to do the show, and then it was more of, right toward the event coming up that, hey, by the way, since we have a certain theme going on for the show, and it's a great opportunity, like a festival, those are pretty common. But then to be like, do you really need to be singing? You're trying to do rock or country or whatever.
Yeah.
And then, do I really have to do that? So it's one of those where it's like, okay, let's try to not lose the deal. Maybe incorporate some of those elements if you can. Like, you could maybe say, hey, I'll put in some textures or accessories or whatever to kind of tie into the theme. I'll even do a toast at the beginning before I film. But for the artist, you've got to look out for that, because you want to use that film and that opportunity to market yourself as part of your image, as is very important.
Branding.
Right. So I wouldn't be putting up on YouTube, hey, this time that I, was in full garb, full medieval garb.
To be a meme at that point.
Really, though? Which, I mean, if you turn into a GIF that you can use on Instagram stories, is that really so bad?
It depends on, depends on how serious you're trying to take yourself, what kind of image you're trying to go off of. That's really funny.
Yeah, so that was interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, obviously this past year, the entertainment industry has been hit hard. And I know this is something you wanted to talk about a little bit on our show. Tell us a little bit about what you've seen that the last, 2020, last year had, what impacts it had on the entertainment industry.
Yeah, so I'm sure as the two of you have even seen, you'll probably see ads popping up for certain events that used to be live that are now offering digital streaming. So you can actually pay to attend, and I'm putting in air quotes for our podcatchers and listeners, attend an experience that you would like to have in person, but at the time of this COVID pandemic has not been feasible. So people are wanting that content, wanting to participate, but it's now been offered digitally. Now we're starting to see a little bit of opening up again, especially, here in Texas. We'll see what happens in the near future, but it's one of those up in the air. There have been some new venues even still continuing to pop up and make plans for the spring. There's a new venue, I think Armadillo Den in South Austin, that came up recently. So we'll see, there might be some hope for live music coming back, although, RIAA came out with some interesting numbers and figures to show that recording industry figures have actually gone up in 2020.
Interesting.
Yeah, but I suppose that makes sense when you think about how many people are sitting at home bored with nothing to do.
Right. Yeah. Why not publish a song?
Right. Well, so are there any points, I know we talked about getting an entertainment lawyer involved early on.
Sure.
Are there any points or kind of benchmarks where you say, okay, look, prior to this in your situation, you probably don't need my advice, you probably don't need a lawyer, but then once you hit here, you need somebody involved. Are there any bright line kind of markings for that?
Sure. I would say anytime you have an engagement coming up, whether it be you've been invited to come onto a show or you've been invited to collaborate with another artist, that's definitely a big one. Check in with someone, see where's that artist coming from? Are they signed to a label? Are they signed to a publisher? Do they have anyone who's got an interest in their work or their writing? If you've got a live event, that's another thing. If they've presented you a contract, let's say the promoter or the venue slides a contract in front of an artist, and you've got to make sure not only, for your own work and protecting yourself, but just think about technical things. Like, you're not going to want to show up somewhere, and it happens, artist says, here's me and my guitar, I'm coming, I'm going to play my little show, and there's no microphone.
What?
There's no, sound system, whatever. I mean, I know I've been through it, where you show up and there's not gear or anything. So you've got to be thinking about that, just walk yourself through when you show up, what do you want in there? Because sometimes those things don't get communicated with people.
Right.
So your advice would be to make sure that when a venue promoter or someone slides this contract in front of the entertainer that the entertainer says, okay, well, I want to make sure that we specifically identify what equipment I need to perform.
Sure.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. And that can also be an expense that the promoter might rent from the artist if they don't have it themselves. Think about that as well, because, you know, that's something that they, in some situations, should be providing, but it's not uncommon for certain smaller, mid-sized venues to just not have that. They may have an empty stage in the corner, and there you go.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh my gosh. Wild.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So when you, in your experience, have you been in situations where you're negotiating with maybe a bigger company, whether it's a record label or something like that, where leverage is definitely tipped one side or the other?
You definitely have to consider clout and where an artist is coming from. One thing that record labels definitely take into consideration are streaming figures, you know, so that'll help your negotiating power, you know, determining how much heat your artist has, you know, like what's going on with their career. Do they have that negotiating power, you know, especially when it comes to things like expenses and budget. Royalties as well. So yeah.
I like that. How much heat does your artist have? I like that a lot. That's awesome.
Well, I do want to ask another question. And so if someone is inspired, right, and they want to be an entertainment lawyer, what are 3 things that you would recommend to them? And say, you know, this girl, I'm just going to say girl, she's early on in her career, say that she's a sophomore in college. What, you know, let's back that up. Yeah. Sophomore in high school. What are your 3 biggest tips to her for breaking into the entertainment law industry?
Yeah, one of those, I would say, definitely become familiar with the workings of the industry. You know, it's much more easy to work with people when you know what they're dealing with and where they're coming from, especially when they use certain industry terms. You definitely want to be sure you're able to communicate with them just on that level and using that jargon, if you will. So the second one would be make connections with people, not just entertainment attorneys, but musicians, producers, filmmakers, actors, whoever's in there, so you can really get well connected and plugged in. Yeah, so, and then the third one, I suppose, study hard. Study hard, because it's going to be a long few years. Yeah.
Well, and piggybacking off of that a little bit, we always like to kind of end our show with some other takeaways. So as far as entertainers or people who should be looking for an entertainment lawyer, what are 2 or 3 things that you think are the most important things they need to think about and understand when they're stepping into this industry as it pertains to having representation?
Certainly somebody who's familiar with the industry. I cannot stress that enough. You know, I've met certain people who say they do entertainment law, but then when it comes to speaking with them about, let's say, a recording issue, and if they're not able to talk with you about the technicalities of that, and then somebody who's even got a critical ear for listening when it comes to copyright issues, somebody who can listen to 2 different works. If an artist comes to you and says, hey, I think somebody ripped off part of my song, you know, like, can you listen to this and let me know what you think? That's a really big talent and a skill that I think an entertainment attorney should have as well. Like, can you figure that out? Or even if you need to read a piece of music and see if, you know, the notes match up in a certain way, that's something that can really help your clients.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, we talk about subject matter experts and things
Absolutely.
like that, but this is you know, a whole new level, being able to use your creativity and experience in the music to actually, you know, advocate for your clients in the legal industry.
Certainly.
That's awesome. Well, Megan, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Very fun subject.
Absolutely.
A lot of things. There's a lot more, you know, applicability to some of the pop culture references that we have here. Less dry than some of our other topics.
Yeah,
so
and thank you for riding along with all my hypotheticals and all their various names.
Oh my goodness, it was a pleasure. So, very fun.
That's it today, guys. Excuse me. Stay tuned for closing arguments. Guys, thanks for listening. Closing arguments are coming up, but make sure before you go rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast anywhere that you listen to your podcast. Check us out on YouTube, and you can check us out on Instagram and talk to us, tell us what you want to hear about. You can search us at #lawyered, spelled out. You can talk to Andrea at andrea.s.turner, and you can talk to me at The Dallas Lawyer. See y'all again soon.
Hey, y'all. Look who's home for summer vacay. Massimo Giannulli, Lori Laughlin's husband, got sprung early from prison. You know, but if you're going to pay a lot of money to send your daughters to USC and be involved in bribery, should you be going home early from prison? I don't know. But at the end of the day, is he really home? No one knows. Could be at a halfway house, could be home. Wherever this criminal is, that's a question that we'll just have to wait and see what happens on.